coalition to control the reins of power. Yesterday was classic PNC, APNU, AFC style of governing, even within their coalition itself. The coalition has been waffling all over the place with their prime ministerial candidate. And so AFC said the prime ministerial candidate was Ramjatan. Then Mr. Granger said that he would appoint the prime ministerial candidate. And then yesterday morning, all of a sudden, you read that the president said, Mr. Granger said that he would not be naming the prime minister until after the elections. And this caught everybody off guard, in particular the AFC, who immediately put out a very confusing press statement that showed how confused they were themselves about whether Ramjatan was or was not the prime ministerial candidate. Then you had Harman come in and say, well, this is a process, and of course the prime minister will be named, etc., etc. And then by last night, Mr. Granger at the Hopetown rally was forced, I believe, to do damage control and affirm that Ramjatan is their prime ministerial candidate. But do remember, at the rally on January the 3rd, Mr. Ramjatan was not announced as the prime ministerial candidate. He was announced as the AFC leader, not as the prime ministerial candidate. And in all the campaign posters that have gone out for the rallies of the APNU AFC, Ramjatan is either not present at all, or he gets injected into a poster late, or he's somewhere out in the parameters of the poster, kind of almost lost. So clearly, all is not well in the camp. All is not well in the camp. But one has to remember there's nothing in the law to require political parties to name their prime ministerial candidate. It is the People's Progressive Party Civic who started this practice and convention in the 1992 elections as part of a new social pact with the electorate, that they had a right to know who were the key leaders who would run the country. And because our Constitution says that we have an executive president and we have a prime minister who is leader of the House, therefore those two persons are key in terms of running government. And so it was meant, when we did in 92, it was meant to imbue trust and confidence of the electorate. And we in the PPPC we have done this for every election since. The PNC has had problems with this on several occasions, in 1997 and 2001, and again in 2011. They didn't name a prime ministerial candidate due to serious differences in their midst. And again now. And as I said yesterday, this was classic PNC, trying to hoodwink their own coalition partner. And as far as I'm concerned, the AFC deserves that. I have no sympathy. I'm sorry, AFC supporters. I have no sympathy for the AFC. They, according to our Creole, they tie bundle with the PNC, just like the WPA tie bundle with the party that in the commission inquiry exposed that the leader of that party, Burnham, was responsible and was knowledgeable about the plan to assassinate Dr. Walter Rodney. So, in the case of AFC, they tie bundle, they jump into bed with the PNC. And for what? Basically, it has turned out, whether people believed it or not in 2015, it turned out it is an obsession with power for power's sake, and not to work for the people of this nation. Well, the PPPC launched its campaign on January the 5th with speakers who spoke about policies and programs of how we shall rescue our nation and how we shall transform it, as we did before. We showcase the diversity of the People's Progressive Party Civic as a national party of all the people, of all the regions, of all the races, of all the religions, women, men, and youth. And we should be holding rallies throughout all 10 regions in this country. This weekend, the 12th of January, is the PPPC rally at Albion, and we welcome all of you to join us. And again, our plan for prosperity, which goes through all the various sectors of our country, what we intend to do to save our nation, to be able to stimulate the economy, which is in the doldrums, and to also stimulate the economy and to have people have job opportunities, people to be able to have greater purchasing power by removing all these taxes and increased licensing fees, etc. And of course, all the transformative projects we've been talking about that the PNC smashed to smithereens when they came in 2015. Remember Myla? If they had let the Myla Falls go on as was in the plan, we would now have an Myla Falls hydro project, a program, producing power for the national grid. And we would not be having all these difficulties with blackouts as we experienced in the last few months. But you know, the PNC came in under the guise of the APNU AFC as a change, something new, something different. They had the answers to everything. And what they've turned out, they came in with revenge in their hearts, that everything the PEPC did, they had to dismantle, throw out, and get rid of. And so now, they will face the consequences of such myopia and such mean-spiritedness in regards to our nation and programs and projects that were in place and would have transformed our society, transformed our nation, and allow our people to live a better quality of life. All of our people, not just APNU supporters, PEP supporters, supporters of the other, 15 parties now in the Guyana. It would allow all of us as a people to benefit. And so we launched our campaign, and people came voluntarily. People organized themselves to get there. At the January 3rd rally, of course, the MC admitted that 283 buses and 1,500 people were mobilized to come. Well, we don't offer concerts and sideshows. We in the People's Progressive Party offer to the people to see and hear our speakers and to judge for themselves what we're saying and our programs for prosperity. We believe and have faith in the electorate to judge our programs and to see if what we are proposing resonates with their interest and needs for themselves, for as individuals, for their families and communities and our nation. What we're saying, does it resonate with the people? Does it offer you a better chance, a better life for yourself as an individual with opportunities and training and so forth? We are not promising anything we can't do. We are not making broken promises. We're making promises. Our people have studied this. They have all the technical competence and they're ready to start working. In contrast, the January 3rd, 2020 launching of the APNU AFC was devoid of how and what the PNC, APNU AFC will do to move this country forward. Last night rally in Hopetown was the same old tired arguments attacking the PPP with no substance of what they, the APNU AFC PNC, offer the Guyanese people. What is their vision for the future, the decade of development? Seriously? That is a copy from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But how does that translate to the people of our country? How does that translate to the people? That cannot be given because, you know what? They don't know how to translate it into practical, pragmatic, main areas of where every Guyanese will say, that's going to make a difference in my life. I like that idea. And so all of this gimmickry is coming from no less than their presidential candidate, Granger. One writer in a letter to the editor stated that he was, quote, stunned at how disconnected Mr. David Granger's rhetoric was from reality. From the public statements he made that night, one is struck by how out of touch he was with the happenings of the ground. And the writer goes on, and I'm quoting him all the time, heaven forbid if we are trapped with him in office after March the 2nd, 2020, because I do not know how this country will survive another year of his policy paralysis. What is clear is the road to a new Guyana appears today littered with the wreckage from the actions of Team Granger. And so the writer goes on and explains a number of areas in relation to oil and gas and so forth, how and why it has not impacted on the Guyanese people. But let's go on to what the writer says. Quote, but from his message at Durban Park, clearly Mr. Granger does not care and is more interested in deceiving the listeners with his empty thought set of good life. Most of that oil and gas investments is being done offshore and has a negligible direct impact on the lives of the Guyanese people, save and except from the approximately 1.5% of the investments associated with the local partners. So this oil and gas sector is a stranger to the pockets of the ordinary folk living in Guyana. Real oil funds will not hit the ordinary people until about 2024 and beyond. So do not be misled by Mr. Granger and count on these oil funds before that time. And so the writer continues. So Mr. Granger and his vocal gimmickry regarding the, quote, decade of development, unquote, is a mere act of subterfuge and deception. But the youths of Guyana in this modern age of the internet will not fall for another of his political illusions. With a click of a button today, many of the youth are finding out that Mr. Granger is, quote, a stranger to the truth, end quote. But one of the things I want to highlight at the rally that Mr. Granger spoke of at the launching is extremely ominous for Guyana and ominous for democracy in Guyana. You know, he spoke about in 2015 about constitutional reform, that this would be one of the top priorities of the APNU AFC government. And in the 5 years, not a single constitutional reform has been accomplished. The Constitutional Reform Committee of Parliament never functioned, even when he was the head of it in the 2012-2015 period. But another writer, who this is a friend and a comrade of mine, Dr. Leslie Ramsamy, in a writer in the media, has commented, quote, his record shows no commitment for constitutional reform. So what did he mean when he said constitutional reform is one of his priorities at Durban Park? He wants to remove the article in the Constitution that caters for a no-confidence motion. He wants to appoint persons for the GECOM chair, the Chancellor, and the Chief Justice in his own deliberate judgment. What he wants is a constitution creating a legal dictatorship. One of his chief priorities for constitutional reform is removing the right of people to recall their government through a constitutional motion. And I'll pause here. Remember, on this program, we've talked about the two pillars upon which a government sits. One is the pillar that the electorate, by elections, by their vote of confidence, they put a government in. And no government can be in office without the mandate of the people. The second pillar has to do with the legislature. A government, a democratic government, must have the support of both. The electorate who has given them the mandate to govern, and the legislature where they have the mandate to govern. And of course, this government lost both. So when you have, a January 3rd, as recent as a few days ago, Mr. Granger is saying that he wants to remove the article in the Constitution that deals with the no-confidence motion. This is an extraordinarily serious comment by Granger. Because what he's saying is that the electorate will remain that, but the other pillar that allows the legislature, by the votes of the members of Parliament, who are elected by the people themselves, can bring down a government by a majority. And so these are fundamental foundations and principles of democratic governments, of democratic nations. In most countries, the government is recalled through a no-confidence motion. In America, the government can be recalled through an impeachment, as what is going on now, with Trump having to face the Congress in regards to impeachment hearings. David Granger wants to ensure that the Guyanese people cannot recall their government. On March 2nd, 2020, Mr. Dr. Leslie says, Guyanese must stand firm and reject Granger's intention to legalize his dictatorship. The people must ensure his term comes to an end on that day. Clearly, this statement by Mr. Granger must not be taken lightly by anyone. He did nothing for constitutional reform in the period when he was in opposition, did nothing for constitutional reform while he was government. But this dog whistle of his, that he's going to remove the no confidence clause in the Constitution, is a very, very serious thing that we mustn't take lightly. And so we want constitutional reform, but we do not want to legalize a dictatorship. And we have to remember something. Let me go back a little history on this issue for you. When Guyana got its independence in 1966, the Constitution, which is what the British kind of gave most of the Commonwealth countries, the countries that became free from British control and occupation, that Constitution included the ability of a government to be brought down by a no-confidence motion in the National Assembly. It was there from 1966. And then it was removed in the 1980 Constitution. So that clause was removed. In the 1999-2001 constitutional reform period, this clause was returned to the Constitution, restored in the Constitution, at the behest of all the political parties, including the People's National Congress. And so that was restored in the Constitution, that whole section that talks about defeat of a government by a vote of the majority of the members of the National Assembly, elected members of the National Assembly. And so this is a clear danger signal that Granger is a threat to democracy in Guyana, and we've had the last year of him defying the Constitution, and where he wants to win by whatever means again in order for him to continue in power. In other words, we will continue to live under a person who does not uphold the Constitution. The residents of Region 5 last night heard from Granger that the backward mentality of the People's Progressive Party would never rule again if they were stuck, if the people, stuck with the coalition. Granger focused on blaming the People's Progressive Party as a political problem. And his words were, the political problem is the People's Progressive Party civic, and we have to solve this problem on March the 2nd. Sounds a bit ominous, but anyway, we'll let it pass. These empty, repetitive, and staid speeches of Granger and his colleagues were all repeated at Hopetown last night. He spoke about Blairmont and sugar, but omitted to tell the people what has his government done with the $30 billion loan that they took out for the purposes of rehabilitating the surviving sugar estates. Where has that $30 billion gone? It has certainly not gone to the sugar estates. It has not been plowed into the sugar estates to rehabilitate those that were not terminated and closed down. So where's $30 billion gone to? That's an enormous amount of money for Guyana. And so, of course, no answers on that, because as usual, the PNC sidesteps, and Granger sidesteps all these issues of accountability and transparency. Yet the posters and flags all over the city say decent and integrity and security. Well, decency, there's a difference between words of decency and transparency and accountability. There's a difference between, I could be a very decent person, very polite and very nice to you, and I could be really corrupt, thieving all over the place, but I'm a nice person. The issue isn't whether you're nice or not, it's whether you are being corrupt or not, whether you are being unaccountable or not for the taxpayers' money, whether you're being transparent in your dealings as a government. So this emphasis on decency it's a non-issue, because the issue is your acts, the deeds that you do in government for the people. What your legacy is what counts. not whether you're a polite gentleman or not. That really does not count when it comes to the people's bread and butter issues. They want to live a better life. They want to be able to earn a living honestly and use it to enhance their lives, their families, and their children's lives. They don't want to be living in a situation where their money is being taxed and they have less purchasing power, less money to take care of their children, where the social safety nets have been removed. The children of Guyana have lost $8 billion in the last 5 years by this government removing the $10,000 for each and every child that is registered in a school from nursery all the way to the end of secondary. $8 billion. Where did the $8 billion get used alternatively? Can we show one project that they could justify that the $10,000, which would have gone to every child, has been used to do what? Show us what the $8 billion was used for. Show us where's the $30 billion gone that we as a country are in debt. We borrowed the money at 4.75% interest rate. And I believe it's a short-term loan of about 5 years. Nothing about that, just platitudes. Just platitudes that, we don't want to close the estates. We want to wean the sugar workers and make them scientists and lab technicians and so on. What a crock. But I am now convinced that Mr. Granger's obsessed with the PPP. And if I were him, I probably would be too. Because he knows he's a one-term government, he's a one-term president. He had his chance, he fooled the people, he told them all sorts of things, hasn't delivered. That's how politics is. That's how governments run. And so he's obsessed. And he can't get the PP out of his head. Because he's always blamed the PP for everything. Not his corrupt ministers. Not his cabinet. He has blamed the PP for every mistake they have made. In government and out of government. Of course, at the same rally in Hopetown, sidekick Camarade Ramdatan, true to form, he played the part of the sidekick, even though hours before he had been embarrassed by Granger's statement that he wouldn't name the Prime Minister candidate until after elections. But here is Ramdatan. He's a good boy. He obeys the boss. He said, the PPP represents the worst choice for Guyana and must remain exactly where they are if Guyana is to properly progress. So we have to pat Ramdatan on the shoulder and say, good boy, you're very obedient. No matter what Granger and the PNC throws on you, you'll drink it up. You'll drink it all up. But the PNC, APNU, AFC, has no manifesto. They have not told people what their policies and programs are, or what they will do in government. They haven't given a report of their track record either. Because when you're asking people to vote for you and you've been in government, you say to the people, look, we did X, Y, and Z. It has led to so many jobs being created. It has done X, Y, and Z. Nothing of the kind. They've come with the same old platitudes. Because they in their head believe that they've done a good job and they are living in a bubble of their own making. They do not understand what the people of our country are going through. They don't go in the interior. They don't go in the rural areas. They don't walk among the villages. They don't go and have meetings with the people where they hear the people's voices. You have aircraft landing in the interior, 6, 7 aircraft land on an airstrip. And they walk in, they open whatever they're supposed to open, and they leave. After spending millions of dollars on the chartered aircraft, the least they could have done was talk to the people and hear what the problems are. They don't. They have not. They have squandered the goodwill that the people brought them in. Their supporters brought them in. But in doing so, they've also discriminated against any other people who are not APNU AFC. And so they have done well for themselves. The cabinet ministers, the prime ministers, the vice presidents, the president, they've done well for themselves in the last 5 years. But can we say that that's the same for the majority of people of this country? Can we say this is the same for the vendors and the hairdressers and the taxi men and the busmen and the farmers and the rice farmers and those who are involved in forestry and the miners and the teachers and the nurses and the doctors and the public servants? Can we say that this is the same for all the people across Guyana? No. This government has been divorced from the people and the needs and their problems from the time they got into government. And they've not woken up. And we need to wake them up on March the 2nd and say, hell no, you had 5 years. You spent over $1 trillion of the taxpayers' money of this country, plus put us in debt over $900 million US more in the 5 years. You've had a term, time to go. We want a new government, and that government is the People's Progressive Party civic government. So all this bubble they've been living in and still do, we're on the international radar, thanks to the IDB report that shows you have the highest ranking for bribery at all levels of society in the region. We have the longest periods to get business done, which allows for corruption to take place. We have chronicled over 60 cases of corruption and abuses of power, conflict of interest. And this continues even as we speak. Even as we speak. A caretaker government, a legal government, is giving out awards of $800 million to build a school. That's not even in the plan for 2019. So how are they using money in this illegal and unlawful way? They're signing agreements, giving out our resources. And all of these speak to corruption, illegal activity, violation of our laws, and crimes, basically. And yet, Mr. Granger has been aloof from all of this. Let me not say more, other than to say that I believe he's, and it's not to excuse him, because if you're the president, as they say, the buck stops at the president. The buck stops at the boss, the top person. And so he can't get away from this reality of what this government has done and what it has done to our money, our taxpayers' money, and how it has used it to not to the benefit of the people, to the benefit of a few. Certainly he is accountable to the people in this election time. He cannot sidestep that responsibility and accountability by calling him a decent man. That can't be the cloak to prevent him from being accountable and reporting on what are positions on these issues. He can't get away from that. You know, my dear friends, these elections are about the people's pockets. Americans say pocketbook, we say wallets, we say purses. But these are elections about your pocketbook, your wallet. Is it going to be better or is it going to be worse? Are you going to be spending more in taxes or less? $88 billion more was collected in taxes by this government in 1 year. It cut everybody's purchasing power. And with increased taxes on VAT and everything else, and all the indirect taxation we pay, it cut people's purchasing power by more than a third. And there was what it mean. More people were poorer. It increased poverty. It increased, people couldn't spend as they used to before, and therefore that led to a downturn in the economy, in the business sector, the farmers and so on. And of course, worse yet, over 30,000 people lost their jobs in this period. 7,000 sugar workers and thousands of people, 2,000, almost 2,000 Amerindian community service officers, another 2,000 in the public service because they came in with revenge in their hearts. And then you have all the people in the private sector and small businesses that couldn't continue to function. 30,000 people? That means that if we multiply that by 5, because most people who work have at least, so let's put it, be more generous, let's say 3, have 3 dependents. 3 dependents. Most of the time it's more, but let's be conservative. 30,000 people unemployed times 3 means 90,000 people are facing serious consequences and increased poverty in this country, just in the making of the PNC APNU AFC. Normally it's 5 in a family with relatives that you also support. So you're talking, if it's a 5, it's 150,000 people out of a population of almost 800,000. That's a very large percentage over 5 years, been plunged into greater poverty. But again, these are all issues that kind of escape the thinking of the APNU, AFC, PNC, Granger-led grouping. But you know, they talk about Big Tent, they talk about inclusivity. What Big Tent are we talking about? AFC? That's not part of the APNU Big Tent. That's an addition to. You're talking about GAP, which is a defunct party, the Guyana Action Party. You're talking about Keith Scott Party, which I never remember what it's called, something Alliance, that's dead, has been dead for the last 20 years anyway. It exists only in the name of Scott. You have the TUF party that was dismantled by Garrido Low. The WPA holding on to the short tails of Granger to make themselves relevant. And that's a party, a shadow of what it was in the 1980s and 90s. And so, who makes up this Big Tent? Who makes up the Big Tent? The youth transformation was headed by people such as Annette Ferguson, who are part of the cabinet, who are part of the PNC executive. So that was just a creation to give an impression that youth was supporting the APNU AFC. Big Tent? So Big Tent is a fallacy, it's a farce. The inclusivity issues are another farce. How can you be talking about inclusivity and you ignore the diversity of our people, the diversity of our geography, the diversity of our religion? How do you ignore all that and still go around and saying you're inclusive? Inclusive of whom? Party members only? So all of this is a sham. This has no reality. When you do a reality check on the words that are being said, as they say in the United States, you fact check. Fact check Big Tent. It's a fallacy. Fact check inclusivity. What do we mean? It's a fallacy. You know. But what are the government ministers upset about in the last few days? The Office of the Auditor General annual report for the year 2018 was submitted to the Speaker of the National Assembly before the end of last year in compliance with the law. This document was not made public. It is in the Parliament waiting for a sitting of Parliament. And of course, my conspiratorial mind believes that there was no rush by the government to call a sitting anyway, because once that happened, the document would then be circulated publicly and be put on their website and so on. And so, and remember, it took until December 31st for Mr. Granger to dissolve Parliament. I think under some duress to do that. But what are the ministers upset about? Not about the findings, which are mind-boggling. And if I were a minister and I had to read the things that the Auditor General found in my ministry, I'd be mortified. I'd be trying to go out there and explain what happened or what I did wrong or what someone else did wrong to try to explain these horrific findings of Mr. Sharma, the Auditor General. However, they're not upset about that. They're upset about the fact that how did the report get out? And attacking the Auditor General himself. That shows the level of accountability and responsibility of this cabinet, of the ministers. And so the findings are mind-boggling. Some of it is getting in the press. The thing is overflowing. The Durban Park again, $600 million cannot be accounted for, no documents. The hundreds of millions in the Ministry of Public Health that cannot be accounted for. drugs that were paid for that weren't delivered 2-3 years later, the ministry being owed hundreds of millions of dollars worth in drugs that were purchased and paid for, of course, without going to tender. And what does the minister think is important? To put out an ad that divides our people rather than brings us together. Puts out an ad quoting from a religious book. When we are a secular state, number one, we are not a religious state, we're a secular state, and that we're a country of religious diversity. But that money cost us, the taxpayers' money. They use taxpayers' money to put out that ad. And so there's a level of thinking. Instead of being worried about why, as a minister, people in different parts of Guyana cannot get basic drugs and medical supplies, she's putting out an ad quoting from a particular religious book. Why is she not worried about in the public hospital up to yesterday? People couldn't get some basic drugs. And where Panadol that was expired was being given to patients. Why is she not worried about that? Because they feel they have an entitlement to be in government. Well, we will take that entitlement away by the ballot box and vote and show our strength. Well, of course, my dear friends, the campaign has started and the APNU AFC put up their flags all over the place and no one touched them, no one pulled them down. And as soon as the People's Progressive Party Civic started putting up theirs in the last week, we have repeated incidents of our flags and our posters being pulled down and destroyed. We have had 2 incidents in Sophia and Lang Avenue, Georgetown, of the mob surrounding our vehicles and preventing the People's Progressive Party Civic from announcing our rally and our meetings. Well, you know, for me, I've been around a bit. The PNC has started early. Old PNC, same, nothing has changed. The Jaguar spots don't change. This is typical PNC behavior in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, and the 90s. It has continued unabashedly, showing no change, although it talks about change. And so let's move to GECOM. What's going on with GECOM now? What sort of stuff came out in the last few days? Over the weekend, the People's Progressive Party went public to inform the people that GECOM was adding names to the revised list of electors. Many had not been verified at the recent verification process of the 18,000 names from the house-to-house registration. The PPP received information that there is currently ongoing at GECOM Secretariat, this is on the weekend, an exercise whereby quote-unquote adjustments are being made to the data on the National Register of Registrants using unverified information generated from the truncated house-to-house registration exercise. The PEP stated that this exercise is being conducted by Melanie Marshall, the controversial returning officer of Region 4, who deliberately made herself unavailable in the May 2015 elections to receive the PPP's request for a recount of votes in Region 4 at the 2015 regional and national elections. Quote from the PEP statement: "This tampering with the NRR by GECOM staff is not only unlawful, but it is clearly intended to cause chaos and confusion on Elections Day by facilitating duplicate voting, permitting unqualified persons to vote, and preventing qualified persons from voting. So, for example, if a person's name or address is changed on the NRR, it is that change that will appear on the official list of electors, which in turn will require the voter to vote at a different location from where he or she is residing, or being prevented from voting altogether. This may result in violence, mayhem, and public disorder on Elections Day." This was what the article that was published in the iNews stated. GECOM responded yesterday at a press conference stating that there was no tampering of the National Registrar of Registrants. However, the way it was explained by the chairperson, Madam Justice Singh, made it even more confusing. I tried to understand what she was saying, and I can understand GECOM things. It just made it more confusing to me than because she said they weren't tampering, but what she explained showed they were actually, if not tampering, tinkering. Says Gunraj, the opposition-appointed commissioner, immediately wrote a letter in response. He says, I note with alarm the admission by the Secretariat of the Guyana Elections Commission that it is tinkering with the revised list of electors after it has been published on the 4th of January 2020. The publication of the RLE is a statutory event, and similarly, very limited scope is available to the Commission of National Registration to make changes to the RLE after it is published. This is limited to entries or omissions that are incorrect due to inadvertence, typographical mistakes by the staff in entering someone's name. The circumstances now being relied upon can hardly be considered as inadvertence. More importantly, the widespread changes being executed by the Secretariat will not be subject to any scrutiny, and these changes will only be known after the publication of the official list of electors. At this time, there is no opportunity for errors, either deliberate or intentional, to be corrected. It does not inspire confidence in the integrity of the process when the following is considered. 1, it was undertaken clandestinely without the knowledge of the entire commission. 2, it is being undertaken by the very department that was previously responsible for the bungled handling of data collected during the house-to-house registration exercise. Up to the present time, Mr. Gunraj continues, no information has been provided to the Commission regarding the process being utilized or the number of records to which changes are being made. It should be noted that any change to an elector's record is a statutory process, requiring the use of statutory forms. This process has clearly not been complied with. All things considered, the only likely outcome of this process is confusing to the electorate, particularly with elections day mere weeks ahead. It is unlawful and ought to be immediately discontinued. This is what Mr. Gunraj wrote to the chairman of the elections yesterday. I am convinced that all that GECOM Secretariat is doing relates to their refusal to accept the offer of the UNDP IT specialist to oversight the National Registrar of Registrants database and the electors database. I believe now we know that if that person had been placed as they were supposed to be a year ago or within the last year, this ability of the Secretariat to play with, tinker, whatever is the right word, with the RLE would not be allowed, could not happen. You know, as I said before, you can't change a Jaguar spots, and my position, you can't change the PNC. Whether it comes in the PNC APNU AFC clothing, the point is that they took the reason why there's been a 14-month delay to hold elections was firstly to allow them to stay and hold on to power as long as possible, and secondly to have the time to tamper with the number of voters on the voters list. I have called for this on this program before. The GECOM timelines and framework must become a public document posted on their website so the people will be properly informed and have assurances that GECOM will have no excuses for delays on election day. That we, the people, will be able to track what they're supposed to do at what time between now and March the 2nd. We don't want to hear any excuses in relation to March the 2nd. According to Lowenfield, there will be approximately 2,351 polling stations, and we in the People's Progressive Party shall be ready with our polling agents to be present at each of these throughout the entire country. Nomination Day, January the 10th, tomorrow, will see political parties taking their lists not to City Hall. And let me pause and talk about City Hall for a minute. This is another example of the abysmal and dismal failure of the PNC APNU AFC government. This beautiful building, City Hall, with its famous architecture, is near collapse. This, particularly under a president who claims to be a historian. If the APNU AFC government had spent the more than $1.5 billion in City Hall instead of the urban park, monies that they haven't been able to account for either, and if he'd made this his legacy, it would have been a far superior use of those monies. But of course, he wanted a legacy that was his, because City Hall legacy goes back to our colonial times. National Stadium is Jack Dew's legacy, and so he wanted his own legacy, and so he has it. Durban Park, $1.5 billion, $600 million unaccounted for, and a place that now most nights is used as a brothel. It's a home for the vagrants and the homeless, and a spot for drug users. And so, where are we going to put our list tomorrow? The political parties will be going down the road, driving, marching, whatever they want to do, to Guyana. That will be the new site for the submission of the list. We are in high gear in the People's Progressive Party. We're in full throttle ahead, preparing for elections, election campaign, and winning the elections. And we must be vigilant and ensure that we have free and fair elections. And you, the viewers, the listeners, friends of the PPP, supporters, people who are listening to our messages and trying to figure out which side they're on, how will they vote? Please, in the meantime, go and check the revised list of electors that is posted up at the nearest GECOM center to where you live, or for those of you who are more tech savvy and you have access to the internet and a laptop or device, electronic device, to go onto the GECOM website and to check to make sure your names are there. When you do check your name, you'll see something called division number. Please write that on a slip of paper so that when the list of polling stations come out, you can take that number of the division and check to see which station you have to go to or which school you have to go to or wherever. And so you need to do some homework. Coming to the meetings and rallies, fantastic. Volunteering to be polling agents and cooks and drivers, we will forever be grateful. But we need to do one thing that only you can do, and that is to make sure you're on the voters list. You and your families and your cousins and your friends are on the list in the right place where they registered. If they're not, you need to go into GECOM, and you can come to Freedom House and tell us about that as well. But the responsibility for you to make sure, because if you come on January the 2nd, I can't find my name on the voters list, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. At this point with the RLE and the information we have of things that look highly suspect with GECOM, with amending the RLE and amending names in the database, if you need to check now. You need to, if you find these unusual things, you need to come and tell us so we can make representation and make sure these are corrected on the official list of electors before March the 2nd. So please take this seriously. This is your civic responsibility. This is for you. And I hope that all of us will come on board Operation Rescue Guyana, because that's what we're going to be involved in between now and Election Day and after Election Day. We have to rescue our nation. We have a choice for democracy, for a better Guyana, or do we have to stay in this rut that we're in with the APNU AFC government, a government that has disrespected the Constitution and has taken this country downwards. And so I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I always appeal to you, don't drink and drive. Be very careful on the roads. We had too many accidents again at Christmas time, but please be careful. We need everybody on board to rebuild our nation. And so don't drink and drive. See if you can get a designated driver, if you can afford to get on a minibus or a taxi so that you're not driving a vehicle or a motorcycle or even a bicycle under the influence of alcohol. And so, my dear friends, at the elections, when they're held on March the 2nd, we in the People's Progressive Party government shall have to start all over again, as in 1992, to reconstruct, to put this economy back on a firm and stable footing and restore the programs which help the poor and vulnerable and those at risk, and restore the independence of the judiciary and the legislature from executive influence, and protect the rule of law and democracy in our nation. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Stay well, stay strong, stay safe, and we will meet each other once again next Thursday right here on Channel 6 on matters of public importance. All the best to you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Feel good about everything you just did because that was an awesome ride.
And the wolf huffed and puffed.
Like you do sometimes, Grandpa?